In case you haven't noticed it, winter is here. And winter, of course, is synonymous with aloes painting our countryside orange and red. And of course, what we do is we take these plants and we put them into our garden. And I call that exterior decorating. And within no time, you've got little plants coming up all over the place. And invariably, these are hybrids of the plants that you've planted for the beforehand. Hybridizing of this nature, of course, is just haphazard and has got no plan behind it. And yeah, it's quite interesting what comes out at times. But if one actually concentrates on selecting plants and trying to combine ideal different characteristics to make a hybrid that is better than the two parent plants, you end up with a vast availability of material to grow with. And along this line, Andy de Wet, who's a trained botanist, has been hybridizing aloes for 50 years plus. Quinton Bean, few years, I think, but both of them have been around for a long time. And Quinton, as a horticulturalist, sees it from a slightly different perspective, looking more at the chemical compositions and, as I said, horticultural side. But they work so well together as a team that they've given us a variety of hybrids that is really stunning. Every year, Quinton and Andy have a aloe expo out at the aloe farm that is sort of to the west of Brits on the old road. And they also have an outlet here in Johannesburg at, is it Warner Valley?
Limborough Park.
Limborough Park, sorry, just off the highway. But I think you should have a show there as well, because I think most of us don't want to go all that far out to Brits every time.
The problem with Limborough Park is it's cold.
Okay, but is it that much colder than Brits?
Yes.
Okay. Andy and Quinton will spend some time talking to us about how they have chosen to create the hybrids that they have got, and some ideas and some experiences and all the fun they've had in the process. Thanks, Andy and Quinton, for being with us. All yours.
Thank you, everybody, for having us in your homes.
Thank you.
And the Johannesburg Succulent Society, thank you for having us. Honored, and we are grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about aloes, because it's been close to our hearts. As you can see from the picture on the screen, I hope you can all see it. The hybrids are, how I started was, I looked in the books, Barbara Jeppe and Reynolds at the time, and I could see that they were natural hybrids. And I thought, you know what, if we selected the parents, we could do so much better. Then I embarked on starting to make hybrids, and Quinton joined me after a few years. And we've been making hybrids for a long time. And if you can see on the picture, when you make hybrids, you can create very bright colors and very strong flowering plants. And when it comes to hybrids, if you look at the yellow in the middle, that's Igoli. It gives you a predictable plant that you can use in your garden that will have a lot of flowers and a lot of nectar that will attract more birds and insects to your garden. So that, and also, you know what, our indigenous flora have been bred overseas for so many years by other people and then sold back to us, that we thought it was high time that we start improving our own plants, and then rather than other people doing it, foreigners doing it in other countries, basically.
I'm going to go to the next slide, Andy.
Good, go for it.
Yeah, so Andy started plant breeding in 1973 as a hobby, working on aloes and later agapanthus. Andy started C&D Nursery and then later the Aloe Farm, and DeWet Plant Breeders was started officially after these two entities. I joined the company in 2005, and we later added a lot of Jenna to our plant breeding activities, and we focused on growing the business as a plant breeding company locally and internationally. There was not a lot of world famous breeding done on indigenous South African ornamental plants by South Africans at that stage. And Andy and myself dreamed of changing that. With limited resources, it was a very slow start, but today we are proudly world famous as ornamental plant breeders, holding many PBRs and patents worldwide, and also having won many prestigious international awards with many articles published about our plants worldwide. Andy?
Oh, okay. So when the average man thinks about plant hybrids, often comes to mind the rose and how the breeding has made the scent disappear. So I know nothing about roses, so I'm not going to talk any more about that. But in our breeding, we certainly take all characteristics in mind in order to improve the product that we create. So improving the plant disease resistant is number one. So when the little seedlings are quite small, we already start on a very early age to prick out all the rats and destroy them. So and during the growth of these plants, while we're growing them and testing them, whenever we see a plant has got a bit of excessive spots, or even a little bit of spots on it, or it gets something like cancer very easily, or something like that, we would destroy those quickly. So in our trialing, disease resistance is very important. Increasing the amount of flowers and inflorescence produced is of most important, because why would you make a hybrid if it's not a lot better than what's already available in the wild? So we try and improve on the species, basically, by increasing the amount of flowers and the amount of racemes, as well as the amount of inflorescences that a plant produces. Now, again, reblooming is incredibly important. So what you want to do with your hybrids, and what we've been doing with a lot of our plants, is we've extended the flowering season so that a very good example is our agapanthus, that you can find that if you go to the Aloe farm today, you would find that we have numerous of our released varieties that are in full flower at the moment, and that's in midwinter. So extending the flowering season makes it good for the gardener, for the retailer, and for the wholesaler. And then faster and easier growing plants. I mean, the vigor is critically important. So anything that grows slowly, it's sometimes painful, because you have plants that are beautiful. They've got beautiful foliage, or they have beautiful flower colors, but they're slow growing. Those kind of plants we will not take further. Even if it has an absolutely stunning, unique flower, we would generally just discard them, and they would not be released, because at the end of the day, we have a brand, which is the DeWet Plant Breeders, and it's important for us to put our name behind our conviction behind our name, so that when people actually buy a DeWet plant, they know that they're getting a superior quality plant that will grow easily and vigorously, and it'll flower and grow faster than the species would. It's if you look at your aloe species, now I know a lot of people are purists, but when you look at the species are adapted to specific natural conditions. In your garden, you don't have that. So you would maybe find a species that you think is really a cool plant it in your garden, and be quite disappointed that it never really grows well or flowers well. And that is why the hybrids grow. We have to make sure that in our breeding, we create plants that are fast and easy. I mean, the most popular plant that we get asked for, the most popular aloe that Quinton and I ever get calls for, is aloe, the spiral aloe polyphylla. And it's such a shame, because that plant really does not grow easily in a garden. When we grow them, we grow a few of them and we sell them. I always sell them with the warning that, listen, you're probably bound to kill this thing. Whereas, and that is what plant breeding is about, is to make it our splendor of aloes available to the average gardener. Quinton, you would take it from there.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the reblooming and extended flowering season in terms of aloes. If you're looking for varieties that flower throughout the year that we currently offer, you would be looking at Tiger Eye, Havenhas Pride, and Little Jewel. So they don't produce as many flowers at once as the aloes that flower once, but you have the benefit of flowering virtually on and off throughout the year. If you would look at extended flowering season, I would name Fire Chief and Porcupine as two of the top contenders. They don't rebloom the whole year, but they will flower successively for months. So, that just really brings a wildlife benefit and just a visual benefit to your garden. Okay, considerations in aloe breeding. I think I'll do this with Andy. Parent selection is critical. If you pick weak parents, your progeny are generally going to be weak in one or many aspects.
Yeah, if I could add to that, you're trying to find Superman and Superwoman, and you cross with each other, and then you're going to get super kids. So one must remember there's a massive variety within each species. So no two aloe marlotis look exactly the same as us. And we select the parents very, very carefully. And that's why our knowledge also of the species is fairly good, because we do look at the different species very carefully. And even in our hybrids, we count the racemes and that kind of thing. It makes a big difference. Our goals, there's so many different goals that you have when you breed with aloes, because there's over 550 different species. So as a plant breeder, I find it's intimidating. There's a bit too much to choose from. And in our breeding, we use hybrids remember, when you make hybrids, for those who actually are interested in doing it, you can cross most of those 550 species with each other. You can cross the hybrids with each other or back onto species, and you can cross the hybrids of hybrids with each other. So the goals could be extremely wide, and of course, there's a lot of curiosity. You also want to see what's going to happen if I use albedo in a hybrid, or if I use something like Angelica in a hybrid. Surely that'll be nice. So it's difficult, because we're not only doing this commercially, we're also doing it out of our love for the genus. Quinton?
Yeah, so I think one distinguishes between sort of career breeding or breeding for the market versus hobby breeding, but within both of those there are differentiations. So as Andy said, we're breeding for the market, and we do this to make a living, but because we love aloes, there's still curiosity. But as a hobbyist breeder, you maybe be doing it more for curiosity than having specific goals set to go into the market. And
Yeah.
then primary selections, I think this is where most people sort of fall down, for lack of a better expression, is selection is everything. You can cross A with B and get 100 seedlings, and you can't keep all of them as your babies and your children and look after all of them. You have to do the selections, and that's the tough part. And the primary selections, if you have 100 seedlings, you might come down to 3 or 4 or 5, and then you'll trial those further. But if you hold on to all your seedlings, you'll eventually drown, and you won't actually get to the end with the best results.
A good plant breeder has got to be absolutely ruthless and goal driven. So if you're breeding, whether you're breeding clivias or aloes or whatever it is, you have to discard 90%, 99% of the plants that you generate, because the more plants you have, the less you can create new exciting things. So you've got to discard things that are not great in order to get to those really good gems. You only want to grow the best of the best. And our primary selections, what we do is we start selecting, when they germinate, we start selecting the weak ones, throw them out. And as we go, we do continuous selections to get to try and narrow down, and until we've got our first set. And then from there, we plant them up and we trial them further and further and further. So the trialing then is also a lengthy process, because sometimes you pick a plant that's really good, but you find that after a little while, it starts developing spots that it didn't in the beginning. And then you realize, oh boy, it's just prone to a fungus or something. And that is why the trialing, it's not so obvious. You get a plant with a nice flower, now you're going to be rich. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to really trial and make sure those plants are really good. And as a side note, if anybody has a plant that really he thinks is a plant that will become an international winner, you can bring it to us, because we would help you to evaluate that plant properly. And even if it really is good, we've helped a few people by putting the plants through our system and getting those plants into the international market. But it's very important to have a very clear idea of what you require for a plant to be successful. I'm fortunate in the sense that I've got extensive landscaping experience, extensive retail experience, and wholesale experience. So, and then with the plant breeding, it helps you to be able to see that the plant's got to fit into the market, no matter how good it is. If it's not suitable for the industry, you're probably just going to have a really good cotton plant for yourself to enjoy. The final selection, Quinton, do you want to grab it from there?
Yeah, so I think Andy sort of covered part of that. Is once you've trialed the 3 best ones you've selected, or the 5 or the 7 or whatever it may be, you have to get down to the point where you pick one. And that's quite hard. And even at that point where you pick the one that ticks every single box that it can for you, then you send it over to California to a massive grower for trial, and it's a complete disaster in their climate. So it's plant breeding is just not simple.
And once we've selected a plant and we think this is really good, it's gone through our trials and all that. It's taken us maybe since it started flowering another 2 years or so. It probably takes another 5 to 6 years before it actually gets into the market. So it is time consuming.
Well, once you've made a selection, do you ever play around with the chromosome number, say make it a polyploidy, see if you get a better product?
Yes, we do that.
Couldn't tell us more.
We do that, and that I think is just like all the other breeding. It's really simple in theory, but once you actually do it, you suddenly realize, but hang on, this doesn't work like the textbooks, or it's not giving me the desired result that I anticipated. So yeah, we do quite a lot of it in different genera, and every genera responds differently, and every genera gets pros and cons from doubling chromosomes or inducing mutations.
Yeah, we do
Does that answer the question?
we do a lot of mutation breeding and also doubling of chromosomes and that kind of thing. It's a very exciting avenue, but not just an easy road to walk, but very exciting.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind if I pop in quickly to
Yeah, please do.
echo some questions from the chat. So the first one we have is from Timothy, and he says, do the aloe flowers ever give off a fragrance? And I'll follow up just by saying, is that ever something that you breed towards?
Oh, yes, indeed. We have an aloe called Crunchy. That's got,
Good name.
it's got a lovely scented, sweet scented flower.
Beautiful scent.
Scented flower.
Mm.
There are a limited amount, as the aloe experts in our group will know, there's a limited amount of aloe species that do have scented flowers. We used a bit of that, and well, Crunchy is our best known hybrid that really has a lovely scented flower.
Excellent.
Like in many genera, it's sort of a textbook rule that scent is often recessive in breeding. And that's not 100% true, but it is often true. And with aloes, much the same can be said. The scent can carry from one generation to the next, but it generally gets weaker and weaker with every cross.
Very interesting. Thank you. Excellent. And then we have a question from Philomena, who says that she grew some aloes from seeds, and then mites and cancer occurred, and was wondering if you have any advice for that. I know that that's quite a common issue, maybe becoming more common. What are your thoughts?
Keith, you know, if I may, I'm not the expert of us two. Quinton is by far a lot more qualified to answer that. But I want to make a suggestion that we do have a Facebook page called the Aloe Farm. And when it comes to pests and diseases, why don't you direct us directly on that one? I'm just wondering if we have enough time to cover. And generally, when we discuss pests and diseases, I found that people's eyes start glazing over when we start talking about the chemicals and all that kind of thing. So we really do know the best way to deal with pests and diseases of aloes, but should we not skip over that one for this actual Zoom meeting?
Absolutely. Perfect.
I agree.
Thank you.
Email me direct or message the Aloe Farm.
Thank you very much. Will do.
Okay, so this slide is just an example of the parentage of one of our random hybrids we selected. And the 44 parents is quite scary, but we actually have a whole lot more. And we believe that keeping track of the parentage is critical if you want to achieve certain sort of preset goals. Other breeders differently, but that's our perspective. But Andy will also say something about that.
We like to think that we do things very scientifically, and you know the thing is when you breeding, often because of the way the chromosomes split, sometimes some of the characteristics get hidden, but they're still there. So in your next generation, maybe you feel that you want Malote to come out again or whatever, and if you know it's there, it is useful to use it again. That's why we do keep record of the parentage of our plants. It's a tedious process, because you imagine writing labels like this for every bloody plant, but it still is necessary.
Well, just some of the aloe seedlings. This time of the year, we have less aloe seedlings in pots than at other times of the year. But our method is to sow the seed into 9-centimeter pots. And then once they get a little bit bigger, we'll plant them out into 128 or 98 cavity plug trays. and then start doing selections. And from there, we'll go to either a 9 or a 15 centimeter pot or a 2-liter bag, depending if we're doing outdoor or indoor aloe, outdoor large aloe hybrids or small pot plant aloe hybrids.
Look, if you look at the tray in the pots in the front, those are Aloe striata. We grow Aloe striata for the landscapers that buy from us. But if you look at on the left-hand side, you can see there's one pot with a massive plant in it. Just an interesting little side comment is that when you sow your hybrid seed, they seem to germinate a lot worse than your species do. But the hybrids, when they start growing, you can see that one plant, it just outgrows all the others. The hybrids grow faster, but somehow they don't germinate as well as the species do.
Yeah, that particular plant is a textbook example of the phrase hybrid vigor. Okay, Andy.
Okay, this was the first plant I put out in the market just to see what the potential of aloe hybrids is. This, I think, most people would recognize as aloe hedgehog. It's a lovely little aloe, 4 different parents, and you probably won't believe me, but one of the parents is Aloe globuligema. And sadly, I don't think enough landscape architects realize the potential of this as a mass plant breeding, mass landscaping plant. But you can see it's easy, it's drought resistant, and it makes a lot of nice big flowers. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Okay, so let me just cover this with Andy's massive experience in aloe breeding and then my experience added. We thought that it's about time to get into the international market, and with our experience, we're going to be rich and famous overnight. Well, that was an unfortunate crash. So the criteria for aloes in the American and European market is completely different to what South Africans and Australians sort of want and desire. So yeah, it's a very complicated market, but we can say proudly that this one is doing very well for us in America and Europe. In Europe and America, it's sold as Safari Sunrise and Porcupine in South Africa. In South Africa, this plant can flower from May right until August if you look after it. Anything else, Andy?
Yeah, well, we took a chance on registering this one, but you know, to get aloes into the international market's been pretty difficult because I took a chance and we registered this as a cultivar in America, and it cost over 20,000 Rand. But it's taken, I think, nearly 15 years for it to catch on, for people to actually start. So there are many hurdles if you're a plant breeder to actually get your plants in the marketplace. But it's a lovely bicolor aloe. It's got a few interesting parents in that. One of them is albedo, if you can believe that.
Also, for the commercial market, this is probably one of your fastest growing aloes that you can get. It'll flower in under a year from tissue culture in a plug. And there's very, very few aloes that can do that. Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys, excuse me, I just had a problem.
Okay. No worries.
Any questions in the meantime? I think that I saw Carol putting up a thing that said that her hedgehog flowered out of seed from time to time. If the plants are very vigorous, it's some of your cultivars will actually flower from time to time out of season. But generally, each aloe has got a flowering season as such. And I don't know if everybody knows, but there's a very, very good reason why aloes flower in winter. And the reason for that being is that nature has designed it that way. Out there in the wild, there are very, very, very few plants that will feed birds in midwinter. So aloes have taken advantage of that. They flower when there's nothing else that flowers in winter. So what happens is the birds actually rely on aloe flowers to survive winter. But in turn, the aloes are very clever. They actually provide the nectar in order to get the birds to come and pollinate them. So it's a very, very good symbiotic relationship where the birds and the aloes actually stand by each other to get through winter and to be pollinated. This aloe, it's one of my pride and joys because it's an aloe that's very dear to me. My father selected it and I named it after my dad. His name was Charles. This is Aloe Charles. It's a very strong, floriferous aloe that flowers with very bright colors in midwinter. It's an aloe that you can use as a specimen or a focal point in your garden, and it never fails to surprise you and pleasure you with its amazing colors. I really like it because of the brightness of its flower. You can see the abundance of really big bicolor flowers.
It's also a very tough variety. It does not get aloe cancer, and it will not get black spots unless you really abuse it. If it's well looked after, it's pretty much bulletproof.
Yeah, it's one of the great things about it as well.
And I mean, I can say with honesty that I have a tiny garden at home, and I have not that many aloes, but Charles is one of the aloes in my garden.
Yeah. So what I did was I planted a Charles and a Sunny on my parents' grave. So the aloe Sunny was named after my mom. And this winter, they were both in full flower at the same time. I felt it was such a lovely way to honor my parents, to have one of each aloe named after them on their grave. It was enheartening when my sister sent me the picture. This aloe, we released this aloe in 2010. Because of the green leaves and the yellow flowers, it was aptly named Aloe Bafana. And I always joke because I say, I wish our soccer team would perform as well as our aloe does. A lovely aloe, and it grows it's probably of the bigger aloes, one of the very fastest growing aloes I know, and very floriferous, and it's an absolute a sunbird magnet. The sunbirds, it flowers in May. May is a very good time to attract sunbirds to your garden because generally the aloes in the veld haven't started flowering yet, which feeds them. So they're a little bit starved in May. And Aloe Bafana is the perfect aloe to feed them. And you can see how it gives you abundance of really, really cool yellow flowers.
I think for Hatti's benefit on the chromosome doubling and stuff, Aloe Bafana is a triploid, so it has 3 sets of chromosomes. So in your seedless grapes and your seedless watermelons, that's how one generally gets the seedless trait. So Bafana can produce some seeds, but they have hollow embryos. And we believe that this sort of frustrated reproductive effort is why it produces so much more nectar to attract pollinators.
Can you breed with 2 triploid plants?
So that varies from plant to plant. Some triploids are fertile and some are not. In Bafana's case, not.
You know, when you read the textbooks, there are very clear guidelines of what works and what doesn't work. But when you actually in practice and you sometimes work with the plants, there are so many of those textbook rules that are broken, and sometimes it works and sometimes it just doesn't. They don't do what the textbook says. You'll find that some of those tetraploids will actually bear seed, and that are viable, and you can grow them. One of those examples is Aloe Caroline. Caroline was progeny. Charles is my dad, and Caroline was named after my sister. And Caroline is a progeny of Charles. And, Caroline's parent was a triploid. And for all practical reasons, it was never meant to be fertile, yet it did work. So the rules are often broken in practice, and that's what makes it so interesting. Aloe Fireball. We called it Fireball because it's got so many red flowers. It flowers very, very strongly. It's very vigorous. It's a very nice aloe to plant with Aloe Bafana. It has one drawback, that it can get cancer, but sometimes when a plant is this good, you actually want to, would still release it. We do that not often, but sometimes we do. The picture on my screen doesn't do it justice. It is a really, really deep red, very dark, deep red, this color. But look how nice that is. Compared to what you find in nature, this is really a win.
Andy, we had a question earlier from Philomena saying, who chooses the names of new hybrids and how are they chosen?
That's the most fun thing of all, because initially, when we started, it was very, very serious. We had to pick a name that because we might never ever be able to pick a name again. But in time, it became more of a fun thing. So we have a little aloe with open mouths, very open mouths, that we called Marilyn because of the way her dress went up. And we've got some. There's a lot of fun names in there as well. The thing with the name is it's very important. I often joke and say, if my father's name was Jacobus Pochenpoel, I probably wouldn't have called the aloe Jacobus Pochenpoel. It's important to choose a name that will also be catchy and that people will remember. So Fireball's easy, people will remember that. That's why we chose that name. And we have a bit of fun with the names sometimes. And picking the names is sometimes got a bit of emotion, like I named them after my parents and that sort of thing. So, yeah, the names are, we get to a stage where we have a long list on my phone of different names, and we sort of scroll through that and try and pick one that matches the character of the plant a bit, but also is catchy. And then what happens is we've got an agapanthus two agapanthus, one called Bingo White and Bingo Blue, because we thought bingo because we hit the spot. Of course, when we released it overseas, especially in Great Britain, they refused to use that name. They wanted to call them Ever White and Ever Amethyst. To me, those names are washy. They're not as good as bingo, but bingo is associated with old people. So we don't want to use that name in the UK. So there's a lot of stories to be told about the naming of plants.
I think the industry rule and the industry advice and experience always says that a bad name can kill a good plant and a good name can make a bad plant. And that has been proven many times over.
So we try and do a good plant with a good name. It's not always possible, but we try. Okay, there's a long story about this plant. In my many years of aloe collecting, I decided at one stage I want to be able to sell the arborescens I sell must be the best red arborescens I've ever seen and the best yellow I'd ever seen. So because we hadn't bred those plants, we called them and he's red, and he's yellow. Just to set a standard, basically. But then I realized that we wanted to have an orange arborescence as well. And we called this one Andes Orange, but you can see it's very floriferous, but there is no orange arborescence that flowers nearly as well as this. So we had to make one. And this is a complex hybrid, and this is maybe something you could see a lot in gardens. Arborescence if you take an arborescence hybrid and you cross it back on another arborescence, you often get something that's very close to arborescence, but it's got a little bit of other herbs and spices in it. And this is certainly, it's got several other parents in it, but essentially it's still arborescence. So we called it Andes Orange to fit into that team, into that set. But if you look at that, that's a beautiful aloe. And this is what we try and do. It's a very strong, growing, healthy plant that flowers a lot. And just remember, the more flowers you have in your garden, the more birds and bees you'll have in your garden.
Andy, sorry. Obviously, that arborescence was that plant was very arborescent dominant. And I'm just piggybacking on a question that Daleen had. Are there any true species that you breed where you're not hybridizing, but you're just selecting within that species range, looking for that? And do you sell any true species, or are you mainly focusing? So you said you had some extra herbs and spices in there, and we won't ask what they are, but is that always the direction you look in, getting some outside external influence?
You know, in our breeding, that's what we've done. But at the other farm, what we've decided, because we have such an extensive collection of aloes and we grow a lot of aloes, we've recently started a tunnel and where we actually grow as many different species as we can. And we're trying to grow also a lot of the rare species. So there are a few plants that we grow for conservation purposes, and there are some plants that are very rare that we actually grow just in order to be able to give collectors something that is pure as well. So we do grow pure, but we wouldn't breed within the species to try and enhance the species. We try and go out of those boundaries.
Excellent, thank you.
We do a lot of selections within a species. So if we get a batch of seeds of Aloe candelabrum and we grow them all out, we'll trial them just as we do our hybrids, and then we'll pick the very best one. So a good example is we've selected an incredible clone of Aloe candelabrum white flowering, or ferox if you prefer, and we've then put that plant into tissue culture. And you can now buy small plants from us, and you're getting a known entity. It's a pure species, but you're getting a selected DeWet-approved clone.
Right.
Yeah. And also, we have the Utrecht red marlotties. We've got a red marlotti that we selected. That is blood red that we put into tissue culture. So we actually have young plants of a blood red marlotti. So you can buy a young red ferox or a young white ferox or a small red marlotti that is guaranteed to be that color. But that's a long process. Marlotti is, from tissue culture, I think it took us 8 years to get our first little plants that we could make available. But then also we select clones. Like, for example, we have a very superior clone of Aloe albida. So if you like albida, the clone we have grows a bit easier than the average one. And that's why we grow it and sell it just for the guys that want to grow the species, but not everybody has access to the best soil mixes and that kind of thing. So you want to help them to grow them easier.
To put it into perspective for people, 80% of the development of maize was just by selections over hundreds of years before complicated breeding and genetic engineering came along.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Awesome answers.
This is Aloe Bushwhacker. Just a nice, young, small, little, very strong flowering plant. And that's basically what we try and do. We just try and give people really good plants. I really don't want to feel that we are better than anybody else or anything like that. The plant world is so diverse, and there is so much scope for people to actually fool around and make hybrids and grow their own plants, because it really is exciting to see if you cross two different species with each other, what will happen. I often say to people, that's one of my famous sayings to people, is that you and your wife can have 100 kids or 1,000 kids, God forbid, and they'll all look different. And none of them will look exactly like you. So that's the mystery and the beauty of plant breeding, is because you never know exactly what you're going to get.
I've got a quick question, if I may.
Yes.
I'm just curious to know whether you do your own tissue culturing, or whether you send part of the meristem off to some lab somewhere to have it done, and then have them grow it into tiny little plants, and then you get them all back. How does that happen in your setup, and how would it actually work? I mean, if you send it away and you get back 3,000 plants, would they be like 1 centimeter big, or how does that work?
We have 2 retail nurseries. Now, plant breeding, we are working on 16 different genera at any given time, and sometimes we dabble on a few more. So we're busy enough, actually. So, we send the plant material through to registered labs that do the tissue culturing for us, and tissue culture labs are quite complicated, because they often let you down and so on. But we use outside labs, and even the plants we send overseas, we often send the plants with a contract where they have self-prop, and they send sometimes plants to their own labs to actually grow them. When the plant comes back from the tissue culture, obviously they are cloned, so they are exactly the same as the parent, barring a few mutations you get sometimes in your tissue culture. But when they come back, the little aloes are the tiniest little sprigs that arrive. And you've then got to you've got to root those little sprigs and get them going again. But by now we've worked it out. It works.
Yeah, I think tissue culture laboratories are our biggest blessing and our biggest curse. If you work with them, you'll understand it. It's very challenging because everything's often unpredictable, and you're supposed to get 50,000 plants on the 2nd of June, and then on the day before they phone you and say, no, sorry, it didn't work. We've only got 50 plants for you. So it's very challenging. But in tissue culture, they generally refer to stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 plants. 1 being where it's just been initiated. 2, where it's multiplied, a little baby, tiny sprigs, but no roots. Stage 3 is where it's got roots. They can take it out of the agar, wash it, put it in a box and send it to you. And you've got to harden them off under special conditions. And stage 4 would be an already hardened off established tissue culture plant.
So how would you harden off the plant that gets to you? Do you ever get stage 2, or do you always only get it at stage 3? And then when you get it, how do you harden them off?
Okay, we never get stage 2 because we don't have the facilities to induce rooting. So if you get a stage 2 plant and you take it out the agar and you stick it in the soil, it generally won't grow. So we don't do stage 2. We'll get a stage 3 where the roots have been initiated. They change the chemicals in the media to initiate roots. And then bearing in mind this plant has now come out of basically a factory or something resembling a house where there's no sunlight. It's only fluoro tubes and grow lights. So you have to keep it in extremely low light conditions where it doesn't get too hot or too cold, aloes are pretty easy. But if it's things like agapanthus or other plants, they need misting or they need sweat tents or various special techniques for hardening them off.
But
Thank you.
But the benefit of it is you could take an aloe that, or let's say an agapanthus that will just make a few little babies in a year, and if you send it into tissue culture, you could get 10,000 plants back in 1 year and maybe 200,000 or 300,000 plants the next year. So it is the way to propagate your selected special little plants. That's the way to do it, is to send it to tissue culture. We just don't live long enough, actually.
Yeah, tissue culture dominates the commercial industry worldwide. I mean, some of your really big labs do literally hundreds of millions of plants a year.
This is Orange Delight. Beautiful, beautiful orange, smaller plant. Just something slightly bigger than hedgehog, slightly like hedgehog, but orange, bright orange. Abundance of flowers, as you can see. Next. Hello, white rhino. So we try and cater for all colors. This is a very easy, strong growing plant with lovely white flowers. White is very sought after in the aloe world. I love this plant. I think it's wonderful.
It makes a lot of flowers. That's what we say to everyone. You know, the collector's dream is to have a white ferox or a white candelabrum, which we sell, and it's nice and it's a structural plant. But a ferox flowers out, you know, in under 2 weeks, or sometimes slightly more than 2 weeks. And it's just, as a gardener, that gives you a very short display, where white rhino flowers for much, much longer. There's something to tease everybody.
So I think this is quite unusual to have an aloe that's like that. This little aloe will be released sometime, and it flowers the whole year. It's a small pot plant aloe, but look at the beauty of that. To me, that just blows my mind.
I mean, that plant, it was probably about 12 years in the making since I've been at the company, but I used genetics in there that Andy had developed for many years before I joined the company. So there's no get-rich-quick scheme here.
I presume albiflora is dominant here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, albiflora repeatedly used in different combinations, recombined until, because the ideal is also, because albiflora is a very dainty little plant. You want something that's actually more robust and that has good flowering proportions. Talking about proportions, this aloe, look, if you look at that, you want something where the aloes, where the flowers aren't too long and skinny and spread out too much. You want something that just makes a nice big cluster in good proportions to the actual plant of the aloe plant. But still, the plant must be very healthy and the color must be bright and all that. And it's got to make a show. Can you imagine a landscaping, a commercial landscaping job where they planted 20 or 30 or 40 of these close to each other? It will just absolutely blow your mind. And the birds will go moggy.
Going back to what Andy said earlier, you just cannot get a species that does this. I just want to go back to the previous slide for a comment quickly. Now, albiflora is obviously prominent here, but what you can't see in this photo is that the individual flower size here is about 3.5 times larger than albiflora, which makes a huge difference.
And the raceme is nice and full. Yeah.
Okay, so we're here for aloes, but I just thought I would run through a few other things that we've done. We're very famous in South Africa for aloes, but worldwide we're actually most famous for agapanthus. So this is our most awarded variety internationally, 3rd place at Chelsea. South Africans are featured strongly in Chelsea in terms of garden design competitions, but no South African or Agapanthus was ever featured in the best new introduction ever until Twister came along, until Fireworks came along. We also breed Plectranthus, which are extremely difficult and complicated, but Magic Mona is doing quite well worldwide. There's some of the cotyledons we were talking about. So that's a 9-centimeter pot, to put it into perspective. You don't get many cotyledons that have those proportions at such a small size. Our Tichamerias, we breed dwarf Tichamerias for the landscape industry.
Tichamerias is quite difficult because there's only really one species you can work with. And the idea is with Tichamera, they often become too lanky and they start overtaking your garden. So our challenge there, or our main goal, was to create a bush that's nice and compact and that have got different flower colors, bright colored flowers, and that flower a lot. So the compactness was really the important thing. And we've got plants that are much more compact than this, but then they don't flower as much as this. So you have a lot of duds, plants that just are not releasable.
And going back to the question about breeding pure aloe species, which we don't really do much of, all these Tichamerias are technically pure Tichameria capensis, no other species used. A little bit of our osteospermum work, we're going through different angles to the foreign breeders, heat resistant, drought resistant, different colors. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy and Quinton.
You guys are welcome. You know, I think we've got the two outlets. We've got the Aloe Farm, we've got C&D Nursery, and we are on Facebook, and I think we're very good at answering technical questions and helping people with garden problems or plant identification. So you can contact us on our website or basically on our emails or on Facebook. And it's not a bad idea to follow us on the Aloe Farm Facebook, because that's where we do a lot of our posting. And come and visit us, because at the moment we've got thousands of aloes in full flower, and it's quite an experience.
And for those of us who locked down in Gauteng, C&D Nursery carries most of those aloes, and obviously can, yeah, they'll arrange for you to get whatever you want.
And my understanding is that C&D also does online sales and does courier. So is that right?
We do. We've got a proper online sales department. You can buy online, and we do via email or WhatsApp or Facebook. You can order plants, and we can courier it to you as well.
Awesome.
You know, I sometimes think that people look at us and say, yeah, but we are cutting edge and we're real plant people who know so much about plants and all that kind of thing. But it's not really true. I think that both Quinton and I are just really basic lovers of plants, and we're really fanatical about what we do. And that's why it's so nice to talk to a group of people that we know that are also absolutely passionate about plants, because that's our life, you know.
Absolutely. I don't know if there are any other questions. I have one question here, and it's something I was wondering as well, but Priya brought it up. I'm sure that there's no direct answer to this, because you guys, you're working over many generations, but about how long does it take you to establish a variety that you're happy with and go through the whole naming process, get it registered? What's the timeline like? I'm sure you've still got plants that you've been working on for a number of years that you're still not happy with.
We have got the most amazing pipeline of new plants. By the time we've got a plant in the market that people can purchase, to us, it's old technology because it takes so long. Generally, once you have the seed, to get it to the market is, I would say, an average of about 8 years, sometimes up to 10 years.
Sure.
So it's not a get rich. Pardon?
First flowering by us to the day that you can buy it in your local nursery, anywhere from 7 to 10 years.
Wow. Incredible.
But having said that, where we do our breeding at the Aloe farm, every single day of the year, we have numerous hybrids of different genera that flower on that day for the very first time. So that every day we go to the farm, we get the pleasure of seeing our hybrids brand new, flowering very, very, very for the first time. And that is why I often say to people, it's like a drug. Once you start, you cannot stop. It's
Absolutely.
such absolute fun.
And
Can I pop in a question here?
Yeah, go, Hati.
Your very first slide on PowerPoint was this fantastic display of aloes, all flowering perfectly, all at the same time. If I look at my garden, some are flowering, others have done, others are only just spiking down. Do you induce flowering, say with a high potassium boost or something like that, at a certain time to get them to all flower at the same time?
No, we look after them reasonably well, so they're well fed, well irrigated, and well looked after. But the nice thing about the hybrids are they're predictable or programmable in a sense that you know their flowering time. It'll vary slightly from year to year, but generally you can plant them according to their flowering time to achieve the result that you want.
It's a blessing to have them flower over a longer period because you're attracting more birds and things to your garden too.
Thanks.
But you can plan your garden for them all to flower at the same time if you want.
Sure.
We do have a magazine that gives you pictures and descriptions and tells you when they flower and all that kind of thing. And also on our website, so you could really plan it to have a magnificent.
And there is some work overseas where they induce some of the aloes to flower based on the day length as per Kalanchoe's, but it's not the industry norm and certainly unheard of in South Africa.
I've got a question. Have you ever tried to hybridize something to look like Aloe polyphylla? Would that, I mean, presumably that would be quite a money spinner if you got that one right.
We've done quite a few Aloe pegloray hybrids. As a matter of fact, at the farm at the moment, we've got quite a few coming into flower now. But polyphylla is not a very good parent in hybrids. For some other reason, the progeny always come out very weak and spotty and not very good. So we would rather use things like pegloray and Cleata and those kind of things to give you a similar kind of growth habit.
Also, polyphylla is a bit of a strange aloe in many senses and how it behaves. It also, the interspecies compatibility is not good. So it won't cross with lots and lots of other aloes like generally most aloe species do. So there are a few natural hybrids with Maculata and with Aristata. But if you try and cross polyphylla, let's say with Kuhlman's red, you're not going to succeed.
I wanted to ask, in terms of your general approach, are you starting out with some end goal? So you by this point, I'm sure you have a real feel for what the outcome is going to be. And you said you have to be ruthless. So are you starting with the idea that you want particular flower color or proportions or something like that, and then you go for it? Or Do you
We
sort of
certainly-
just go for it and experiment and see what looks best at the time?
I think it's a muddle and a mix of both of those. We certainly, sometimes it's not just curiosity of to see what lobbly gemma would do with this or that. And then often you would say, you know what, I really would like a very strong bushy plant that makes millions of bright yellow flowers.
Yes.
So you do those goals, and then often, because of the unpredictability of your seedlings, you would find that suddenly you're on a new tangent because you realize there's a goal that you can achieve that you didn't think of.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're more goal driven than ever before. So you have a predetermined set of goals, but as Andy said, sometimes you cross A with B and you want to get C, and then all of a sudden X comes out and it opens a whole new avenue.
And what really makes it fun is the fact that we are independent plant breeders. A lot of your bigger companies, a lot of the plants you buy in the marketplace are bred by big commercial companies. They have strict budgets and rules and what the breeders can and can't do. We are completely open-minded. So we break rules and we think, oh, well, this will be fun. We do it. And I find that gives us a freedom that sometimes I think the bigger companies lack, and the bigger breeding companies lack, and they miss out on things that we can do that they can't.
Awesome.
I've got a question. You said that the South African market and the Australian market is very, very different to the European and American markets. So obviously there are different preferences in the US, for example, compared to here. Can you comment a little bit about that?
The Northern Hemisphere, when you watch American movies, everything's in bright sunlight and all that. But if you actually, and Europe, but if you actually go there, you'll realize that most of those areas in the Northern Hemisphere are often very cloudy, rainy weather. And you have plants that, your plants have to be a bit different there. And that is why when you buy a Barberton daisy or a geranium or a osteospermum or a gazania, I don't know if I said that, but a lot of those kind of plants, you'll find that you buy them, they're African plants and they're supposed to be drought hardy. And you plant them in your garden and they fizzle out very quickly because they've been selected for cloudy, overcast, wet conditions. So it is important to know the target you're breeding for.
In the US or in Europe as well, what people don't realize is 80% of a nursery sales are in spring. So if your plant doesn't look good in spring,
80% of the nursery sales in spring.
So if your hybrid that you've lovingly developed flowers in summer instead of spring, you've got a very serious problem.
That is why aloe breeding for America, for example, is very, very difficult because they flower in winter. If you have an aloe in your garden in New York, it's not going to survive. Never mind flower. So it is a challenge as well to breed things that will fit in the overseas markets.
I'm sure.
The culture is different. The European and American markets are very, how should we say, happy with the disposable concept. As South Africans, if you spend 100 Rand on a plant, you expect that plant to live for 100 years. Americans don't care. You buy it last for summer, you throw it away.
Yeah. In the eastern side of America, they buy plants in spring and they expect to buy new ones again next spring because in winter.
Weather.
Andy, just to come back and Quinton, sorry, Chris here, about that polyfiller story. it really troubled me when we had a succulenta conference some years ago, and I sort of told people that I'd already killed 3 polyphilus, and a Dutch fellow, and then someone else from New Zealand sort of said, well, you know, that's a bit odd. You know, these things are dead easily. Plicatillus is another example in New Zealand. They grow them on the sidewalks. Is that probably just because their climates are a bit closer to the habitat climate? What do you think?
100% climate. If you look at California as a brilliant example, Northern California, Aloe polyphila grows like a weed, but in Southern California, as you get to the Mexican border, you can't grow Aloe polyphila anymore.
And most places of
So
South
what's
Africa,
the trick
you
for us to water it more? What?
No, you've got to move to California, but
Yeah, move to New Zealand or Northern California.
So we have to outsource our conservation efforts to California.
But that's an important point. Sometimes it's important for a plant to be grown in cultivation because they are so endangered in the habitat. I mean, you take something like aloe bakery, it just doesn't exist in nature anymore.
Which one?
Which one, Andy?
Aloe bakery.
Which one was that?
Bakery.
Bakery.
It's extinct in the wild.
Yes.
Yes.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
can I ask a question generally to anybody that can maybe give an answer? I have a family friend that lives in Vancouver, and they've been having quite a spell of heat there, where they go up to 40 degrees in the, and he's got some cacti in his I think flat or small dwelling that he lives in, and he says to me they withering at 40, they dying. Could I please, could I give him, yeah, but I think they live under air-conditioned conditions. And he says to me, can I not give him advice? I don't know if he's taken that South African strain that he's paid $100 for it and he wants it to last 100 years. But I don't think he's come up with that living for just 1 year and he's going to throw it away. I think he's got that South African drag. Has anyone got any comment that I can give him?
But are they indoors or outdoors?
Sorry?
Indoors or outdoors?
No, they're indoors. Indoors under air conditioning. And now outdoors is sweltering heat. And he says, you know, he says, you the cacti fundi, whatever it is. He says, what must I do? I don't know what to tell him.
You know, that's a bit out of our scope, but I can't imagine trying to garden in Canada, because can you imagine if you've got those minus 40 in winter and plus 40 in summer? What plants are adapted to those conditions?
Yeah.
I don't know about Quinton, but I can't help there.
It's hard to say without seeing the specifics, but one can't comment.
Yeah, I think he's going to hate me because I haven't given any advice.
The serious guys obviously build greenhouses. If you build a greenhouse,
most likely overwatering them more than anything else.
No.
You think overwatering would kill it?
He's most likely overwatering. That's the single biggest cause of death in indoor plants.
Yeah, and withering is often just because the roots have rotted, so they can't bring any more water up. So then we see it's withering, so we add more water, and then it rots more. So it might be that.
And it dies.
Just as a side note, because we're talking about aloe breeding, everyone thinks aloes are so tough and heat resistant, which is true to a point, but I was involved in a project where we trialed aloes in the Middle East, and friends that have done it in Arizona. And in Arizona and the Middle East, the aloes do not stand a chance. They are just smashed to pieces by that extreme heat and dry climate.
No, interesting, huh?
Interesting, yeah.
Means you've got to watch your aloes more.
And have you guys ever been contracted to produce aloes? I'm just thinking about something like the Hoodia craze that went on. Now we know that aloes contain particular ingredients that are currently used in products. Have you ever been contracted to produce something that's particularly high in aloe or something that, or are you guys purely going for the aesthetic?
No, there was interest at one stage in testing a lot of our hybrids to see the chemical profile and look for things that are high in X or low in Y, but it never went anywhere. It was all just sort of discussion and theory.
And then additionally, do you mostly hybridize within South African aloes, or are you bringing in something like Aloe lavranosii from
any and
Wet and
all
Quinton?
aloes are fair game to us. We use any.
Right.
Yeah.
And is the
We both
hybridization?
have,
Sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
We both have an extremely strong love for South African aloe species, but we also both love all aloes. So yeah.
It would be crazy to exclude aloes that don't occur in South Africa.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Such interesting genetics out there.
And do you find that the hybridizing is just as easy with so South African to something else as it is with South African to South African? Do you find that the genetic variance is, not so far apart that they do just hybridize?
There's definitely a bit of a barrier between Madagascar aloes and South African aloes.
I wouldn't say a barrier in the true sense. In your F1s, there's not such a barrier, but what you get is a lot of sterility.
Yes. Yeah. So they don't always work the way you expect them to, but you've got to try this and try that and get around the incompatibilities that definitely do exist between different species.
Yeah. I think a good example would be to say, can you cross Aloe desquengzi with Aloe barbarae? That doesn't work.
You did mention this general hybrid vigor earlier on. Do you get that also when you cross different strains of the same species? Again, I'm sort of thinking of, say, taking Aloe pilonzi or something like that, which is being threatened by global warming. If you take pollen from one part of its range and put it on this plant on another area, whether you'd get a more vigorous plant that can actually survive.
You could, but it wouldn't be so noticeable if you take something like Pilanzi, because it's got a more limited distribution range, because genetically they're more similar. But if you take something like, let's say, Aloe marlotti, and you take one from Polokwane and you cross one from Malalan or, say, Northern Natal, you'd find that there could be a hybrid vigor that's quite noticeable.
Yeah.
Or something like arborescence, you could probably also do that if you took one, because it's got such a wide distribution range. And genetically, the further they are removed geographically, they generally are also further removed taxonomically.
Oh, wow. Even though they're the same species.
Even if it's the same species, you'll find some vigor there. You could then maybe cross, look, something like Aloe cooperi. You could probably find, if you go to the extremes of the distribution area and you cross them with each other, you could find something that's a lot easier to grow in your garden.
If you look at the two extreme edges of the distribution of a species, let's say arborescence in Malawi and arborescence in Graskop, they're so far separated that they evolve differently. So although they're the same species, they are quite different, and when you cross them with each other, you can get you do get a kind of a hybrid vigor.
Interesting.
Wow.
Fascinating.
And going together with that question, earlier on you mentioned, and this is something that I promised someone I'd ask about, I can't remember who, but that with some of your plants, you said that you throw out the spotty ones. Are there any other particular variations that occur frequently that are clear problematic, I don't want to say mutations, but effects of the phenotype where it's, through the hybridization, something comes out that weakens the plant?
A lot of these questions have got long answers to them. For example, if you make hybrids with Aloe humilis, we've got something we call humilis disease. And it's not really a disease. It's just some of the plants come out a bit funky, a bit funny. And
dysfunctional.
And they're dysfunctional. And you can almost see they're young. It's never going to develop into a proper plant because there's something wrong with it. It's genetics.
Sure.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But we know a few people that, and we've experienced this ourselves too. Sometimes you grow two aloes of the same species, and they could come from the same area also. I saw that a lot with Alexandra, with his hybrids, that you cross the same species with each other, and there's this enormous variety within the species, which I think that's something that purists enjoy a lot as well, because they're growing still a pure species, but some of them are so much cooler than others,
But that, of course, leads to the question of the definition of a species, because if you've got something that breeds true, it's often one of the definitions, whereas if you've got a species where you hybridize it intra-species and you get such a wide range of offspring, maybe it indicates that may be a hybrid of its own.
You must remember that the demarcation of species is basically there because of our human convenience. I think that to actually demarcate plants from one to the other is sometimes, I think it's impossible. And I know that the taxonomists have a lot of fun with that because they'll throw together a lump together and they'll split again and do all those kind of things with very good justification. But at the end of the day, I'm a more practical kind of person, and I think me and Quinton both. And sometimes you just want to be able to put it in a box where everybody can talk about a plant and know what it is. So let's take Ferox and Candelabrum, for example. If you say Aloe Candelabrum, I've got a picture in my mind and I know what I'm talking about. And if you talk about Ferox, it's similar, but it's quite different. And it's a human classification. And there are so many reasons why you could throw them together, and there are so many reasons why you could split them. And we've got to be careful not to get stuck in those conversations of whether they are species or they aren't species, because nature doesn't work that way. There isn't a finite line that splits plants from that are similar or that migrate from one transition of one to the other.
God, cut everybody out. Sorry about the clock.
That's what it was.
Are we running out of time?
No.
I think Hardy also to just maybe look at it from a different perspective is if you take the arborescens from Malawi and you take the arborescens from Kroskorp and you cross them with each other, yes, you're going to get a hybrid vigor, but your offspring are going to be looking just like arborescens, just faster growing and slightly bigger or more vigorous. They're not going to suddenly look like Aloe Pigleray or something. So you're still going to fall within the definition of arborescence.
And if you take something like arborescence and you go to all the extremities and the different areas where they've adapted to grow to, you could split them into, if you're an enthusiastic taxonomist, you could split them into 20 or 30 or 40 different species because they're all slightly different. But we still have to be practical about it, I think, you know.
Well, the lumpers versus the splitters.
Yes.
Exactly.
And we often get ourselves into trouble by saying that taxonomists have to justify their existence by knowing things. And it's just difficult because I've been breeding for nearly 50 years and I have record keeping of all those 50 years. And if you've been naming Aloe candelabrum for the last 39 years, and now somebody says, now you must change your records because it's not candelabrum anymore, it's ferox, then I want to say to him, Futsek.
That depends on whether that depends on whether the ferox or candelabrum you used was in fact the extremes of the species and not sort of an intermediary.
Yeah, you know, but you know, I find
ferox is Eastern Cape, and you get the entire spectrum. That's why they
yes, you do.
Together.
You do, but yet, you know, a guy like Reynolds did a lot of work on them, and he did the traveling and the descriptions and all that, and you still find that by and large, candelabrum looks like candelabrum and ferox looks like ferox, and where they meet. Yes, there's a bit of confusion, but in general, you could split the two on various different characteristics. And I could even tell you if it's a hybrid, if it's a ferox hybrid or a candelabrum hybrid. I can distinguish the difference between the progeny in a hybrid. So that's how clear it is in my mind. But as you say,
that's amazing.
Intermediates.
Sure. And do you, when registering a hybrid, do you have to record what the parents are, or are you allowed to just leave it a mystery?
So that's changing over the years. In the US patent system, there's absolutely zero requirement for naming any species whatsoever. The PBR system has been stricter in the past, where they require sort of some form of disclosure, but it is slowly changing.
You know, if you spend the time and the money, if you think how many of our progeny we have to destroy just because they're just not good enough, and now you have to tell everybody else how to do it.
Yeah.
That's a point.
Absolutely.
Here along that line, I mean, take for instance orchids. They have many of the watered plants. They know exactly what parentage went in each step of the way. And on the other side, with the roses, there's absolutely no knowledge.
Yes.
So it's everything goes, I think.
And even if we knew what the ingredients were, you guys went through so much selection to get to what you did. We would probably end up with a completely different plant.
Yes. We have certain simple hybrids that are a replica of what you could find in nature. For example, I've done some Marlow arborescens hybrids. And if you see the natural hybrid and you compare it to the hybrids I've made, it's chalk and cheese. The hybrids we've made are so much by leaps and bounds, so much better. Because we just selected the best arborescens, the best Marlotti. It's not the two that just happen to occur next to each other. We picked the best of, and that's why in breeding it's so important to select the parents.
Okay.
Excellent. I think if there are any last questions that anyone wants to pop in the chat here, otherwise we don't want to keep Andy and Quinton here all night. Or we would like to, but they might not like to.
Very good. Any more questions?
I think that's it.
Happy to
Yeah,
answer.
looks like it's it.
Anyhow, Andy, Quinton, thank you really for all your time and the enthusiasm that you've got. If I may just end up with one quickie question. Is there a predictable time when we could find you guys at your nurseries?
You know what? We no, there is not. Because we are both quite busy all the time, but we are really quite happy to meet with anybody. If you get us on our WhatsApps or emails or that, set up a time and come and meet us. I really think that we've been working very hard, especially at the Aloe Farm, to do display. We've got all the gardens at C&D, but our display gardens at the Aloe Farm at the moment are absolutely out of this world. It's a worthwhile visit. Ask Carol to tell her. She was there.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm going to be posting some photographs on our Facebook site just to show you how beautiful it's looking at the moment.
Again, thank you very much, and thanks everybody else for joining. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you.
Speakers.
Awesome to meet you, Quinton and Andy. All the best.
Thanks, guys. That was good.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Andy.
This drive home is going to be nice and short.